Hello, everybody. Welcome to Full Out Healing. I'm your host, Sable, and I'm so excited to have you here today for episode 16. Just a quick note. I really can't tell how much it translates, but you might hear some music in the background. My neighbors are getting down, and you know what? We are going to get right down with them in this healing motion, okay? All right, so today is episode 16, and as I've done with all other episodes, I am going to talk about a topic and discuss how I related to it in the past, how I relate to it now, and my hopes and desires for the future, okay? So, juicy. Today's episode is called I Wasn't Abandoning Her, I Was Abandoning Me. Okay? I'm actually really excited to dive into this because there is a version of me that really needed to hear this. And I'll just get into it so you'll understand more why. Okay, so basically in the abusive relationship that I used to be in, there was just sort of like this, the language of me abandoning her, my ex-wife, was used heavily and often. It was used to, I can look back and recognize when she did not get what she wanted from me, she used the language of I was abandoning her. And I remember initially, like, that didn't make sense. And then it confused me. And then eventually I resigned to, wow, I'm such a terrible person. But let me dive into it a little bit more specifically. So in the past, when I thought about this idea of me abandoning her, I used to think, this is once that evolution, maybe devolution, that descent of thought occurred. So I used to think, well, I guess spending time without her is abandoning her. I also used to think that not having my attention on her is abandoning her, that this is what counted as abandonment. I also used to think that, to kind of avoid any of the accusations of being someone who's abandoning my ex-wife regularly, I thought, if she's in the room, in the house, or awake, I have to give my energy to her so that she doesn't feel that I'm abandoning her. And this was quite literally the language of abandonment was used. And not only that, conversely, I can have my me time when she's asleep, when she's on the phone, or when she's gone, for work and hanging out with the friends. Kind of. I'll get into that. Well, actually, it's kind of because even when she's gone, I thought I still need to let her know that I am thinking of her even when she's away, right? And I'm looking at all of these thoughts, and these aren't my own natural thoughts. These are thoughts I started to think after different violent incidents occurred, and it wasn't even necessarily always a tie to a violent incident. Maybe not a physically violent one, but a psychologically and emotionally violent instances. It was like all of these thoughts I took on after having like an argument or a discussion or some type of a fight where she was dissatisfied with me. And as I like in any attempt to sort of explain what my perspective or what I intended, all attempts to do that was shut down when she said I was abandoning her, because that's like the most egregious crime you could commit. That was the most egregious crime that I could commit. And so like, even as I'm saying this now, I'm realizing, oh, that's kind of was the pattern. And I think that's why it was so heavy for me, is because this was language that really shut down any space for me to be able to explain what was going on or like have my own perspective. But of course I didn't recognize that at the time. At the time, I just knew like, oh shit, Sable, like you better not abandon her. Like do anything at all costs to avoid even the chance that she feels or perceives that I could abandon her. Like that's what registered at the time. And you know, it was exhausting. It was overwhelming. I felt so overwhelmed with what I had to do, what I had to say, how I had to be in order to make sure that I wasn't abandoning her. It made me feel incredibly anxious. And just back to the exhaustion piece, I travel a lot for work. And when I would leave for work trips, she would say, "You're abandoning me." If I didn't like let her know when I landed or that I got to the rental car or that I'm in the hotel, all these little steps of the way, it was like abandoning, it was like digging salt into the wound for the initial crime of abandoning her by leaving in the first place. And it was to the point where I would leave for work trips and I literally, you know, I deliver professional development. I also do like strategic planning and like change management consulting. And the nature of that work can be very fluid. Depending on the type of session that I'm facilitating, I'm like on site. And even though the sessions end at 3 or 4, I still need to do follow-up work in the evenings to adjust what I'm facilitating the next day, to synthesize whatever insights and, you know, to create resources that makes it a more, to create any resource that supports the goal of the whole trip in the first place, right? All of which is to say is very time intensive. But because I was like so afraid of like the accusation of abandoning her, when I was on these work trips, I didn't even like, when I got back to the hotel and I had to tell her every step of the way where I was, even though I shared my location with her, I had to stay on the phone with her to like hang out and like express interest. And at first I would just like kind of have her on the phone in the background while I was doing work. But then she would just like blow up and talk about how insensitive I'm being and how like I'm emotionally abandoning her and I'm not being present and I'm not being vulnerable in this conversation. So then like I came up with something, I forgot what the exact language was, but it was like present convo versus light convo, something like that. Like I would begin to share like what I had the space for, and that worked until it didn't. She still required that like I talk with her literally about, I don't even, like honestly nothing, like a show she was watching, how she felt about something she saw on Instagram. Like I literally just had to give her my attention. She would even be playing video games while FaceTiming and I still had to like be in conversation with her. And I mentioned all of that it was exhausting because I'd be on these conversations. I I was so just panicked and stressed about like the whole abandonment accusation that I'd stay on the phone and try to be present. And then it was only once we got off the phone at 10, 11, sometimes midnight, that's when I would start working to prepare for my presentation for the next day. And like, I was just so sleep deprived because I needed a few hours of uninterrupted work. And like, I still, sessions started at 8 a.m. And so I was just so exhausted by these work trips, not just because like the work I do it's intensive and work trips are tiring, but I think what made it tiring was the lack of sleep and the amount of attention that she still required, even though I was like working. It didn't matter. In fact, I had to prove it even more that I wasn't being this abandoning type person. It was just literally physically exhausting and emotionally, I don't think I recognized it as emotionally draining because I really felt wrong for doing that. But like, I'm getting ahead of myself. I also felt afraid. I felt afraid to cause her the pain of abandonment. Like it was just like the word abandon. It was just such a charged word and obviously tied to childhood traumas and things. And so I think that was the other thing is like this simple word, but it was so charged and tied to all these other things. Like the accusation of me abandoning her was just so loaded, and in a way it almost justified however she chose to react when I didn't give her what she needed as proof that I wasn't abandoning her. And as a result, as I've been saying, I felt very determined to not be like everyone else in her life who abandoned her. Like, I wanted to prove to her that I'm not them. I wanted to prove that that I'm here for her no matter what, and that I would never abandon her. And even just hearing myself say that now, it makes me a little bit sad because I can see how impossible this entire setup was. But part of the power and the violence behind using the whole language of abandonment really cut me off from being able to make those connections because of how charged it was at the time. And so the narrative that existed in the relationship was, well, I abandoned her when I travel for work. And I also abandon her when I spend time with other people. And I abandon her when I don't greet her at the door when she's come home from work, or like when I don't stop whatever I'm happen to be doing at home and she comes back. And I, on a side note, it became eventually easier to avoid these things, which it wasn't entirely conscious. Like, I didn't think, hey, I'm avoiding this so I don't get labeled abandoned, or like so that I don't get labeled as this cruel abandoner. It was more so I just, whenever I encountered decisions or opportunities to do something, I just became so tired and was honestly wanting to avoid a violent blow up at all costs that I just would choose. It became easier to choose the path of least resistance. And that's how so many of these things, it just became easier to not spend time with my friends. It became easier to just say no to a work opportunity because of like the impact it has on my relationship or marriage or whatever. And it also, like, when it came to dropping everything that I did just to meet her by the door, it just occupied so much of my space and time, and it became easier for me to like not get too into something I'm doing for me, because if I miss her at the door, like it's not gonna be a good night. Another narrative that existed in the relationship is that I was emotionally abusing her by abandoning her. Like that was just kind of the understanding that I'm just harming her. And I'm harming her because I'm just so inconsiderate and just not like a good partner. And not only that, another narrative that kind of existed within the relationship is because I am harming her through my emotional abuse of abandoning her, I need to repair the harm I cause. And I'm responsible for that. And the way that I repair the harm that I cause is by being available, which, spoiler alert, was never enough. But that was literally like the dynamic and the construct, you know. I just do these hurtful things that cause her to be abandoned. It's abusive of me it's emotionally abusive and harmful for me to do these things that cause her to be abandoned. And it's my responsibility to repair the harm of abandoning and emotionally abusing her by abandoning her. Like that was kind of the dynamic. And I just, I really had internalized that. Like I really, at the time, I felt so awful, so shitty, like such like a terrible partner. I genuinely wanted to atone for my sins. Like I genuinely felt desperate for the opportunity to repair the harm that was like attached to me doing things that was abandoning her. Like I felt guilty, I felt wrong, and I just wanted to make it right. Because I became to believe that. And speaking of beliefs, part of the reason why my thoughts were able to transition into this space, part of the reason why I was able to internalize this narrative is because I think this sort of exacerbated a belief about myself that I had coming into the relationship. And one belief is that like I'm a cold bitch. And you know, that's kind of how I interpreted why why conflict was in my life, why people go away, is because I'm such a cold bitch. Like that's how I used to think about it. And I had even, you know, I really picked up that narrative, and that was a narrative about myself that I internalized and became a belief really during my teen years. And I can look back on it now and recognize like, oh, I wasn't a cold bitch. I literally just had a basic ass boundary, and the other person had a temper tantrum. And instead of naming and owning their displeasure with my boundary, I received like a character attack and a character assassination. And I internalized that because I looked to the people outside of me, whether like in my family or in this relationship, to, you know, like to validate who I thought I was. And what they were validating was this like false notion that I'm a cold bitch. But that I believe that about me, about Sable. And that's why all of this shit, the thoughts and the feelings and the narratives about me abandoning her worked. Because to be honest, it just wasn't that different or distinct from what it was like in my inner world. Another thing that I started to believe was that I can't trust that what I think is appropriate because I don't understand relationships or what healing trauma is. And this is twofold. I kind of like walked into the relationship with a little bit of like, I can't trust what's appropriate, because I felt really insecure about like not having enough relationship experience, not having enough queer experiences. I felt really insecure about that, and kind of, I think it was twofold. I kind of deferred to my ex-wife, and she like gladly took the space. So that was like a two-way street. But then the part that became a new belief that I took on in the relationship is the idea that I don't understand what healing trauma is. And it's really, I really think like, wow, I fucking witnessed a masterclass in manipulation, because I think about like the work it took to get me to take this belief on is astonishing, aggressive, masterful in the most awful and imaginable ways. But this kind of, the whole like, I don't know what healing trauma is, it kind of, I think I talked about this in another video. I don't remember exactly what episode, but you know, it was earlier in the relationship, maybe like 2 years in, and maybe a year and a half in. And I just remember, maybe a year in, but like, I just remember talking about healthy versus unhealthy relationships. That was like becoming more, it was more trending to use that language and framework to understand how people relate to each other. And I asked her, well, what do you think our relationship is? And she, mind you, she's a social worker, so there is like sort of like a power dynamic here. And I also didn't trust myself. So all of that combines to just be fuckery, to be honest. But you know, she basically said that's really a problematic binary that doesn't apply to us in our relationship. And it just makes her so frustrated that the field is like perpetuating binaries in this way, and just really kept talking about how much of an evil binary it was, and how our relationship is outside of that paradigm. Like, we're beyond it. And I was like, I guess you're right. Which, you know, I need to do an episode on my relationship with my gut, because that's just like a whole word. But yeah, I think she kind of, I eventually took on the belief that, well, I can't trust what's appropriate because I don't know what healing trauma looks like, because I took on this belief. Basically, she kind of just positioned herself as an authority as to what this looks like. And I'm trying to think about how, but like that whole like beyond the binary of healthy versus unhealthy, like it's just like miraculously out of nowhere. Like, but yeah, that I just believed it. I believe that I don't know what healing trauma is. I've inherited all of this stuff that I'm trying to unlearn. I don't know what it looks like to be healed. And so I can't trust what I think is appropriate. All right. Fast forward on down to the present. Okay. How I relate to this is so different. I now know, like when I think about this, about the idea of like that I was constantly abandoning her, I now know that this amount of contact was neither appropriate nor healthy. I also now know that me doing things on my own is not, and will never be harm. And like on a side note, it for me now it registers, like I love being by myself, and I actually love to say I love being with myself. I love time with me. I have so much to do and so many ways to just be, and I'm just loving and luxuriating in it. And it's to the point where like I see the richness in my relationship with myself, and it's to the point where for me, who I am today, it's a red flag for me if you are unwilling to spend time with yourself. And it just seems problematic to me that I'll just leave it at that. And so now I know that me doing things on my own isn't harm, and I would argue, I think it's a harmful expectation to like not ever allow that or create space for that, because it's really invasive, and it really sort of like interjects itself in and gets in the way. I see it as getting in the way of my relationship with myself, which is the most important relationship I'll ever have. And so, yeah, I just think so differently about this now. And which means that I kind of think going back to my initial gut reaction, I think it was unhealthy of her to need that much time with me and require my attention constantly. I now look at that and I'm like, wow, I don't even know what your inner world is like to require that. Like, you literally refuse to be by yourself. And when she was by herself, she couldn't withstand it long enough. Like, when she was by herself, it caused something that, she just couldn't do it. And instead of being with herself, she found ways to project things onto me, and I see it so differently now. I didn't recognize like, wow, she can't ever be with herself. What's up with that? I used to be so focused on how like around this narrative about how harmful I am and all this other stuff. I also recognize that attempting to meet her standard for attention required that I abandon myself. It simply was not possible to be in relationship with myself, to serve myself, to meet my own needs while satisfying all of her expectations and requirements that would lead to me never abandoning her. It just literally is like against the laws of physics. The math doesn't math. It just was never possible. And even as I'm saying this, I'm like, wow, I was so consumed by this. I spent so much time and energy, and I experienced so much agony over something that was never possible. And that's wild to me. It's wild to me now, and I hear that and I'm like, damn, like that inner world was a crazy place to be. These things, these wild constructs just don't come up out of nowhere. They take time to build, and they are built on a bedrock of like shitty self-beliefs that no one asked for. Like, when I was growing up, when I turned 18, transitioned into adulthood, I didn't go to the belief store and like pick and choose the things on the bottom of the rack. Like, no, that's not how it works. So it's just like, oof. I literally every act of trying to meet her standard, I was abandoning me. And not only that, I've already forgive myself for that, because I recognize that abandoning myself was actually pretty easy to do, because my own needs and desires never registered as important or relevant to me. Like, and that wasn't even new to the relationship. What made it new in the relationship is that became like an expectation. Like, FYI, your needs and desires are irrelevant. But I'd kind of been moving and operating with that because I had learned that. I learned that growing up, that my needs and desires are not relevant, that they cause harm, that they create burdens for other people, they make life hard. And so I just never, I look back and I recognize I never really had an opportunity to develop a positive relationship to my own needs and desires. Like the disconnect was real, and it just never, it's my needs and meeting my own needs and desires never connected to my emotional state because I was constantly chasing and desperately seeking worthiness. And, it's such a losing battle. And the fight for worthiness never ever has anything to do. I'll say this. My fight for worthiness has never ever had anything to do with what I need, what I desire, or how I feel, ever. And so it just makes sense that it translated in this way. I also, when I think about this today, I love this. This is juicy. I have me time whenever I decide to have me time. And not only that, other people's presence does not dictate when it's possible for me to have me time, because guess what? I also choose when I am in other people's presence. Like, I make that choice with my agency, and it just feels fucking great. Like, it just feels like so much control over my life, and I really marvel at how powerless I felt when it came to me time. It felt like a unicorn that maybe it comes, maybe it doesn't, but whatever it was totally outside of myself and not in my control. It just feels so damn good to know that I get me time when I want me time. And it feels even better to know that that is always going to be fucking true for me for the rest of my life. And I'm in awe that I lived so long, like definitely within this relationship, but honestly, even beyond it. And part of it's because, the struggle with no and the struggle with boundaries. Like, I'm astonished that I lived that way for so long, but damn, I am so grateful to be here right now and to know it just feels so satisfying to have a deep knowing that I'll always be able to have something that I need and that I can be the one to give it to me. Like, that feels damn good. I also recognize that this constant attention that my ex-wife required from me was oppressive. And it was oppressive because, like, literally just like the constant energy, just like it weighed on me. But it also was oppressive because it prevented me from for over 6 years, it prevented me from ever having enough stillness so that I could connect with me. And not only that, so that I could connect with me and what my needs are and what my desire is, and to even recognize that those things matter because I matter. I think that is I think that was the hidden but expensive cost of this all. Like it wasn't even just internalizing these awful messages about myself. I think that the constant need for attention, of course, paired with, the constant threat of violence, but just that constant need of attention, it really prevented me from being in relationship with myself. And that is that's where everything starts. Like, that's where any chance or opportunity to know myself, free myself, love myself, to be able to create what I desire, it all starts there. And as I say this out loud, I'm just like, damn, that's like really powerful. And it's making me think about just like the language of abandonment and requiring attention as a device, and just how, like, as a device, that was violent because of how it disconnected me from me. And I know I've had a lot of practice with disconnecting myself from myself and dissociating. But what was different is that, like, I never consented to experiencing like sort of this like constant psychological assault, to be honest. It just, and what it, I'm like just really sitting with what it took from me at the time, and it takes my breath away. But then I also have that much more compassion for the Sable who survived that, because it's like, damn girl, you really did the best you fucking could. Like, you figured all this shit out, and you didn't even have a relationship with yourself. You kept yourself alive, and you didn't even know who you were. You didn't have that relationship with yourself, and you're still able to do all those things. So like, I'm astonished, and I'm also like, wow, that version of me needs rest. And the way I can provide her with rest is to support her with putting down these narratives that were never fucking true, because they drain her, and she don't deserve that shit no more. I feel, I guess I started getting into this. Yeah, like, I think about the whole like abandoning her versus abandoning me, and it makes me really sad. Like, I just feel so sad for that Sable. And like, I also feel so compassionate for her, because she really took on so much shame for, falling for it. For being duped into it. Like, I say all these things now and it just seems so obvious. And there was a point in my healing journey where I was processing these things, and then I would attack myself and judge myself for not knowing this obvious thing in real time, and therefore letting myself be really taking on an inappropriate amount of blame and responsibility for the violence I experienced and never consented to. So it's just, yeah, it's wild. I also, though, at the same time, and I alluded to this earlier, I feel relief and I feel free. It just felt like a cloud weighing in on me. No, this is what it feels like. If you've ever, summertime, have been somewhere so humid where it's like hard to breathe, that's what it felt like. But it was hard for my heart to breathe, my eyes to breathe, I also feel very determined to never, ever, ever, I know they say never, ever, but I'm going to put a never on this. I feel so determined to never, ever, ever abandon myself ever again. I will never abandon little Sable. That is my boo. That is my little girl. Like, I have her fucking back. And having this clarity and making a decision to commit to myself in this way actually gives me a lot of courage and dispels so much of the discomfort I used to have around setting boundaries, choosing me, putting me first, because like I have a relationship with little Sable. We talked it out. Like we hashed it out, and she has forgiven me. She trusts me now, and like we've repaired shit. And I just know that I'm never doing that to her ever again. And just having that connection with myself, it just all, the big scaries behind boundaries and saying no, they're not as, they seem like dust to me compared to breaking this promise to little Sable. And they seem, especially since it just protects me. Like keeping my promise to little Sable, like my life is actually easier and better. Like she is on my side. And it feels hard, but what I get out of it is what I want anyway. And so yeah, I'm not abandoning myself ever again. The narrative that I have about this whole abandonment thing is I now recognize that I believe she weaponized jargon to take and siphon and suck my time, energy, and attention without my consent. It created a power dynamic that enabled her to extract from me whenever she desired. And that's how I understand it now. You know, I don't know why. I can't get lost in the why'd she do this, why'd she do that. None of that actually matters. But like what matters is like what I experience and how I understand it and what I'm choosing for me. And so regardless of what her why was, that's what she did. And that's the impact it had on me, period. I love this belief, which I remember saying it and it just, it fell on deaf ears. It was just wrong crowd. But I believe and know and understand that I am a human being with natural limits. Period. This is not a flaw. This is not a flaw. And any person, institution, or experience that treats it that way, I don't belong there. And it requires no apology. Like, I will not apologize for being human. I just won't do it. Not anymore. I also believe that I get to decide what is an appropriate expectation for my time, my energy, my attention, and my resources. There is no objective truth when it comes to my time, energy, attention, or resources. It's just mine, my truth. That's what matters. And I really see how sort of the notion of there's an objective truth about what's appropriate. I think that's actually an idea I see weaponized a lot. And it just really sets us up to be out of alignment with ourselves, and someone else's opinion on what's an appropriate expectation of my time, energy, and attention and resources, that's none of my business. And I don't care to know it, but I receive it as data that will inform just how much access you have to me in the future moving forward. So thank you for the information because it is noted and received. The future. So this is something that I'm practicing, and I'm really practicing choosing me without hesitation every single day and at every opportunity. And it is my hope that the time between recognizing my need and unapologetically owning it and going full force with it, it is my hope that that time shrinks every single day until it's instantaneous. I'm getting better at it. I'm getting a lot better at it, actually. And I look forward to life surprising me and teaching me how I could get even better. And my desire, I really, it is my sincere desire that if you've related to anything that I've said, it's my sincere desire that you forgive yourself for abandoning yourself, and forgive yourself for ever abandoning yourself. And it is my desire that you forgive yourself for not ever knowing how to choose you. I didn't know how to choose me. And when I finally did, it was the scariest, most courageous thing I've ever done, even though I felt so small and so weak at the time. And I had to learn how to choose me. That is not practice or self-knowledge I inherited. And life has provided the circumstances that have offered that lesson, But yeah, I just, because there's just so much shame around. I just feel like society fixates on like, why didn't you leave, or why did it take so many times? And it just feels so, the question, I don't think has good intentions. I don't think it's curiosity based. I think that, people, I just think that if there's inquiry around an experience of abuse, it's my desire that people walk into it with a certain set of assumptions. And one of those assumptions should be that like the person who's experiencing abuse is literally doing the best they can with what they have. And that if this is what the best they can do is, then what they have must not be great. And what they have quite possibly might not have been what they chose for themselves. Because who would choose this for themselves, right? No one. That's why it's abuse, because you didn't consent to that shit. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there. I could go on and on and on, but that's what other episodes are for, okay? Thank you so much for joining me. We episode 16. I think this is 100 Days of Truth, day 21, maybe 20, maybe 22. It'll be in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me, y'all, and have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.